The most compelling use cases for AI aren't people or AI, it's both. Leaders who learn how to partner with AI will almost certainly open doors that many others don't. In this episode, a few steps on how to get started. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 738.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Leaders aren't born, they're made. And this weekly show helps you discover leadership wisdom through insightful conversations. Boy, a conversation that I've been having a lot with folks, and I know that you have too, is a conversation about AI, many conversations about AI. How do we use it well? How do we partner with AI? How do we bring the new technology into organizations? And perhaps most importantly, how do we think about it in new ways? The technology is changing faster than I think any of us can keep track of. And the mindset, the principles for how we work with AI are going to shape so much of our work as leaders going forward. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome a guest expert who's going to help us to be able to think about partnering well with AI as we move forward, as the technology changes. I'm so pleased to welcome Faisal Hoque to the show. He is an award-winning entrepreneur and innovator and founder of SHADOKA and NextChapter. He is a 3-time Wall Street Journal bestselling author of the books Reinvent, Everything Connects, and Lift. He has just released his newest book, Transcend, Unlocking Humanity in the Age of AI. Faisal, such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Dave. It's an honor.
We had Ethan Malik on the podcast a little over a year ago, and I just happened across a post from him on LinkedIn while I was reading your book, and he posted this video montage of all of the ways that AI had created video snippets from prompts. And when you watched it, his point was you couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what was created with AI. And I watched the videos and I thought, wow. Like, I think we've all had the experience of seeing videos that were produced with AI and we thought, well, I can tell it's really not real. And his point is, we really can't tell anymore. So many things are real. And the technology is changing so quickly on this, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, this is exciting and frightening at the same time, because with that sort of manifestation of reality comes a lot of questions and a lot of responsibility and a lot of danger as much as opportunities.
You tackle those questions in your book head on, and you make the point, of course, which we've all heard, that there are the people out there that think that AI is the best thing that's ever happened to humanity, is going to save us all. And then there's the opposite extreme of people who think that AI is going to take us down. And both of those extremes could be correct, right? Like, we don't know how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it all depends where we end up as a collective society 3 to 5 years from now. And some cases, it's accelerating faster than many of us have anticipated or kind of thought through. So the time for guiding it appropriately, quote unquote, is now. We have no longer have the luxury not to take it seriously, both from opportunity point of view, but also putting together the guardrail so that it doesn't go out of control.
One of the things I hear so strongly from you and also some of the other experts I've been reading on AI is the word moderation of, yes, there are the extremes. Yes, this could go either way, but that there's an opportunity, even an invitation for moderation. And what is it that's important about thinking about it that way?
Yeah, look, it boils down to basic humanity and which part of our humanity we want to protect and what is humanity anyway. Those are the quintessential question of today, right? So when we talk about moderation, the very thing that you started the show with by saying that we can no longer detect what's real and what's not real, right? So So there has to be a case where we have to be able to identify the identity of not just human beings, but also all these digital digital quote unquote species that we're creating. And we got to be able to tag the intellectual property rights. We have to be able to protect privacy, and we have to be able to protect citizen as a whole from the manipulation by other people, and some cases even government, right? So these are very fundamental questions, and these are moral question, legislative question, as well as technical questions.
One of the invitations that you make in the book is to think about how to best effectively partner with AI. And of course, this is even for those who would say we shouldn't trust AI, it's going to take us down, that the inevitability of the technology and the integration in so much of our daily life and work is obviously happening. And so thinking about how to partner with it well is so key. And you make a couple of key invitations in doing this. And one of those invitations is to ask better questions. And you write in the book, what will always matter when interacting with AI, as it does when interacting with people in the world, is the ability to ask perceptive questions that invite illuminating responses. The better our questions, the more information we receive in reply, and the more we can access knowledge and insights that we would never have been able to acquire by ourselves. And you go on to say that the most fundamental principle for doing that well is to be genuinely interested in the answer. What is it that's so essential about that?
Yeah, so I'll come to this question just in a moment. But first,
please.
Unlike any other technology that we have seen in human history, we've never seen a technology whereby it's so active, meaning it's really, some cases, it's going to be much more smarter than we are. And essentially, we're creating a new entity that could be even much more superior than us in terms of its cognitive and knowledge base and its ability to kind of think through problems and the things that we're asking to do and whatnot. So hence lies the challenge and opportunity in the sense that it's no longer like, how we used to have computing and we had a email system where you would write it, it will collect the data from you and it will kind of transmit to other people. This is an active engagement whereby it's becoming our co-worker, it's becoming our co-researcher. Some cases it's a companion, some cases it's even co-creator of creative output. And as it is already, because of the collective knowledge that especially the large language models are built upon, most people are familiar with, when you talk about AI, they think about the large language models, meaning, the chat GPTs of the world and Claude and other type of large language model. It has so vast amount of knowledge. If you want a active engagement and you want a intelligent and meaningful conversation, then you have to guide the question and the interaction process that are deeper than shallow. So you can't just say, what do you think about this? What is this? And what's the context? And how does that impact what I'm trying to do or learn or think through? So this interaction gets far more deeper, much more contextual, and much more conscious. And that also, by the way, applies when we are designing these things, right? So if you're designing, let's say, a simple thing as like a customer interaction system that may be a chatbot, you have to ask, how does the user is going to react from the answer that this chatbot is going to provide to your customer base, so on and so forth. So this ability to ask the right question goes on as a user who's using this, as a designer who's designing this, and as a worker who's working with these things to achieve the daily tasks that we're trying to achieve.
I'm just struck by two things in thinking about what you just said. One of them is thinking about how it's sort of ironic in a way that here we are talking about technology, computers essentially, and databases of all this information. And interacting and partnering them with well actually means tapping in more to our humanity and the things that we genuinely do well as human beings when we're at our best. And the other thing that really I think is interesting is when I think about what you just said of providing context and being genuinely interested in the answers, how that same advice is so critical when interacting with people. The skill set is maybe not the same, but it's so similar.
It is, and I actually wrote a piece over this weekend. It just got published in Psychology Today. And my argument was that how do we design AI with empathy? Because, and the example that I gave, imagine you're in your health portal and you're asking the chatbot about some test result, and the chatbot is answering you by saying, test inconclusive, contact your provider immediately. And it's 3:00 in the morning, right? How would you feel with that answer? So the next generation of AIs are going to be much more contextual and much more empathetic, and how we behave as users and designer of those kind of conversation and direct and move forward is going to be critical, because it's going to have a social impact, it's going to have a psychological impact, and there's an economic impact, because when those systems that are being designed and delivered by commercial entities, the customer is either going to feel good about themselves or not going to feel good about themselves based on the interaction and the answers they're getting from this system. So we're going to have to be much more thoughtful, just like you said, with each other in terms of how we design and create and deploy and interact with these quote unquote entities that we're creating that are really a next generation digital species.
It is in some ways just so ironic. I think about the conversations of 10 years ago where so many people suggested, and lots of parents really wanted to get their kids learning how to code so they could know how to interact better with the technology. And here we are 10 years later as we interact with technology that we've never seen, that's so much farther advanced, how approaching it from a human mindset and our humanity is actually in some ways the best way to go about this, because the technical parts are already there. It's the humanity piece that is where we can really partner in effective ways.
That's exactly right. And this, the automated code generation, I lived through it because I started my career in mid 90s when there was the dawn of technology, modern technology in terms of internet and visual coding and that sort of a thing. So we have been at it for a while now to hide the complexity and simplify the complexity so that technology can take care of itself. And we are now reaching a stage where the code is going to write its own code and logic is going to write its own logic. Machines are going to interact with machine, and machine are going to get intelligent based on the policy and the logic, and perhaps also the emotion that we are pouring into these systems. Because the human beings are now interacting with this machine in a natural language, that's where the large language model shines so well, because we created a natural language interface, meaning human language interface, is learning from that interaction. So the more we get better at how we interact with ourselves and what kind of moral value and what kind of leadership code and ethics we put into these systems, I think the better chance we're going to have in quote unquote protecting or elevating and perhaps transcending humanity.
You ask us also to adopt a beginner's mindset and you quote the Buddhist monk Suzuki, who says, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." What's essential about that mindset with AI?
Yeah, it's approaching things as if you're learning for the first time. So, because, one of the advantage of having this vast access of knowledge and vast access to collective thinking through this computing power and the storage that AI provides us is that there's many ways of looking at things. So, if you don't have a beginner's mind kind of mentality, you have a lot of preconceived notion. So when you have preconceived notion, it's harder to learn. And here, not just you're learning new things, you're learning in a very different way than we have ever done before. Like, I often find myself when I'm doing research saying, okay, can you give me some data set on this particular topic? And then I would argue with my large language model or whatever thing I'm using. I think your data set is wrong because I know, something about this particular topic and it's not quoted by this person or that person.
Hmm.
And I find myself having this back and forth. And then I would also find myself like, I'm not familiar with this. Can you provide me additional research data? And so these are very much like coming at a naive point of view and learning in a very different way. It's almost like having a guide with you all the time to explore new things. And if you're going to have a guide, then you have to kind of trust the guide. And you also have to challenge the guide because in this case, the guide also hallucinates. It's not always comes back with the right data set. So in many ways, at least the way where we stand today, a good domain expert is going to become even a better or exceptionally good domain expert because you have such access to such amount of knowledge and computing power.
You and so many of our listeners, me too, we've had so much training in our fields. We've developed expertise in one or more areas. And I think this is something that I know I find a struggle with, of like really putting the hat back on as a beginner and approaching something from that mindset. When you observe people in the organizations you work with and support who are able to do that a bit better, or at least get started, what do you find that works to just put on that beginner's mindset hat again?
Yeah, look, I mean, Dave, you know this, your own practice and your own journey. The best leaders are the one that has always surrounded themselves with people who are smarter than they are and then learn from them, right? So
Yeah.
in many ways, you have to take that kind of an attitude with this set of knowledge source and tools. You can say, okay, look, I have this set of resources that are smarter than me, and I'm going to learn from them, and I'm going to let them do what they do best, and then I'm going to guide my organization or myself from that point of view. And you have to take this attitude of learn, unlearn, and relearn, which I've done that repeatedly in my career. I mean, I've always been an entrepreneur, but I have explored different fields. I've written about different things. And each time I've taken on a new project, or each time I explored a different industry, I went there by saying, I know nothing about this. Why don't you teach me, right? And if you teach me, then I will be able to add value from what I know, right? So you have to kind of take that attitude, and it's such a enormous opportunity to do so. So, for example, in the very beginning of our conversation, before we started recording, I was telling you that the books are all pledged for cancer research because my son is a cancer survivor.
Yeah.
And I didn't know much about cancer, and let alone the particular blood cancer that my son has. And I've used technology to come up to speed, and now I can have a pretty somewhat coherent and intelligent conversation with the oncologist and other experts that are in the field. And that came from interest and many ways from a survivor mode for my own family's sake, right? So it all depends on what's your motivation, what you're trying to achieve, and where do you want to go, and what do you want to learn. And the reality is fulfillment almost always comes from learning and exploring the unknown and feeling good about the achievement of the learning that you have had. And as a result, you have become a better leader or better guide or better domain expert in the field that you already work at.
Indeed. And as I think about your example and you learning more about this to support your son's health, like what a fantastic example that is of being genuinely interested in the answer, like we were talking about earlier, of like when you find that thing, whatever that topic is for each person, for each organization, like how key that is to be able to get traction with this. And, you know, a related lens you also ask of us is to cultivate comfort with uncertainty. And you write, in order to partner with AI effectively, we have to own our ignorance, and not just our ignorance now, but potentially for all time. And I read that, and my first thought is, ugh. that's kind of like hard to like frame and think about, right? Like this is really very new and very different for all of us.
Absolutely. You know, because, you know, I mean, as a technologist and a business person, I've always had this logical lens, right?
Yeah.
But over the years, I've got more and more into philosophy, and philosophy compared to computer science or management science is much more abstract, right? So, but I found solace in philosophy because it makes us, it's ask question. Philosophy in general asks question, and it allows you to ponder these bigger themes. And so, you were asking about learning. So when I took on this book project, it kind of started 3 years ago when I was finishing my previous book. And I said, I really need to partner up with a bunch of researchers who comes from philosophy background. And I recruited, a couple of philosophy scholars, Paul and Pranay, who has helped me with this book because they come from the philosophy background. And so that's yet another example of exploring something. It doesn't have to be just with AI, and AI and technology is constantly changing, but help you guide from a different perspective, different pattern, different way of thinking, and then mashing it all together to kind of make yourself better. That's really the key theme that we kind of wanted to highlight in Transcend, that look at the different patterns, create your new patterns, because that's innate human ability to be able to do that. And if AI can help you, which it will, then you can achieve enormous amount of positive impact, no matter what field you are in.
Indeed. And when I think about leadership, like so much when I think about the applications to AI, I come back to so many of the core things leaders need to do well in any context. And I was just, it's interesting, we're talking about this. Someone asked me on a interview on another podcast recently, what do you see as some of the most important traits for leaders? And one of the things I mentioned was an increasing comfort with discomfort. Of like the nature of leadership is that you are going to be uncomfortable a lot. It's just like you can't be good enough at all the skills. There's always going to be conflict to navigate. There's always going to be things coming up. That is the work of leadership, decisions to make, difficult headwinds, of course. And the people I see that don't by any means eliminate that, in fact, in some ways lean into it, but develop a bit more comfort with just being uncomfortable, tend to thrive more as leaders over time and really help their organizations. And how interesting, like I'm hearing such a similar thing from you on thinking about AI, and that part of like getting better at this is just getting comfortable with the fact that you're not going to figure this out. It's going to be uncertain. You're going to have ignorance on this. That's just how it works.
That's exactly right. And then you have to also kind of look at a very macro point of view, right? So it's not just AI. If you look at where we are as a world, I mean, there's massive geopolitical uncertainty.
Yeah.
There is economic uncertainty. And then you have AI, which is creating all kind of agenda about future of work, future of jobs, future of learning. and how do you calibrate the organization so that you can encourage the next generation, yet you can gain efficiency, but the efficiency not for efficiency's sake, efficiency for effectiveness. These are a lot of paradoxical dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
And we want to be self-sufficient, but we have to be global and interconnected. It's all, I mean, the paradox hasn't been more, we want to use AI, but we don't want to use AI. These are a lot of paradox. So if you just take a moment to just to think about these paradoxical things that we are encountering, I think the future leaders are going to be the one who are going to be calm under pressure and kind of navigate through chaos and stay focused on a core value system that pushes them and their people to kind of make maximum impact while surviving for the short term.
And thinking about paradox, there of course are paradoxes here too, and there is fun to be had, and
Yes.
in addition to the challenges. And one of the other invitations you make is to bring a sense of playful discovery to this. And you write, when learning is identical to playing, this creates a very strong intrinsic motivation to keep doing it. No one has to convince children to play because it is fun enough that they want to continue. And so, when partnering with AI, particularly as individuals, let's have fun with it. And I thinking about that invitation from you, and when you see people tapping into the fun with AI, what do you see them doing?
Yeah, look, I play with it all the time. Like one example is that when Google kind of released their narrative platform, you may be familiar with it, called Notebook LLM.
Oh, yeah.
I went in there and loaded up one of my article, and I prompted the LLM to say, okay, have a discussion around it and tell me what you think. And then AI generated this conversation like a podcast, just like you and I are having, and I found it fascinating. And then the next version came out, and I could actually ask question. And so these are and it got some things right and something wrong, but it was interesting to explore how it got what it got, right? So, well, let's say there are now all sorts of image generator. You're creating a presentation, and you say, okay, I'm going to use a AI generated image, and I'm going to just go wild with my prompt that says, create an image that's in, I don't know, in Kyoto, one of the Buddhist monk, and show me a person meditating. And as a result of meditation, they're being enlightened. Create me image that kind of show me that. So, typically I couldn't do that because I had to tell my graphics designer to come up with a bunch of these things. But now I can play with it, and then I can go to my graphics teams and say, hey, here's some sample ideas, make something out of this, right? So this is what I meant by play. It's just not just from that. You can even try to say, I want to create a music note, or I want to write a poem, or I want to, whatever your interest is. Draw up a map for next 60 days where I want to explore the globe. These are all kind of like very interesting way of looking at things.
I've been doing something similar and yet different in that whenever I'm trying to shop for something and I don't know where to start, like a brand, and it's something I just don't know anything about. One example I can think of recently is we were ordering new towels for our bedroom, and
Sure.
of all the random things, I thought, like, we've had these issues with these towels for years because they kept floofing and causing all kinds of problems for years. And finally we needed new towels, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go into ChatGPT just randomly and like, ChatGPT, here's what I want out of towels. I want them to be sustainable. I want them to be organic. I want them to be nice. I don't want them to floof after years and years. And like, I went through this whole ridiculous list, and it generated this list of like 4 or 5 companies to look at.
Yes,
and sure enough, it was great. And we bought these towels, and it was like, it's a silly thing in a way. And yet in going and doing some other purchases like that in the recent past where I wouldn't have even known where to start on like doing a Google search. It was really interesting to like learn what worked, but also what some of the limitations were and like what would get surfaced incorrectly, and going through that process. And just because it was like such a low risk thing, like it didn't like, okay, we ordered the wrong towels, whatever, like not a big deal in life, right? But because it was such a low risk thing, I could have fun and play with it and do things that I would normally not think about doing with something that's a larger, higher visibility professional project. And by doing that, it actually gave me more confidence to use it for more professional activities. You know, it's sort of ironic.
Yeah, and I mean, so by the way, a related challenge or opportunity is that the those towel manufacturers, just to take your example, are going to have a heck of a time to make sure that now the customer has more freedom and more power to compare and uniquely kind of design their desire of purchase according to their need. They're going to have to be much more competitive,
Right?
So that's a consumer example, but on a different example, since we're talking about impact and learning and whatnot, cancer as an example is a disease where you have to be very cognizant about each patient's particular scenario, and treatment has to be very unique for that particular patient, right? So
Indeed.
the drug manufacturers and the patient care providers are excited about AI because all kind of disease now can be detected and treated very individually, very customized. And as a result, the quality of patient care and the lifestyle of those patients are going to be incredibly much better than it ever was. So as a leader, this is your mental gymnastic to think, where can you add value with technology like AI that allows you to go much more deeper and much more meaningful for the audience that you are catering to.
Well, and speaking of meaning, the final invitation you make in thinking about partnership with AI is increasing your emotional intelligence. And you make that recommendation actually throughout the book. And you write on this: to ensure that these partnerships are maximally effective, we will therefore have to work on our emotional intelligence, our ability to feel, to know how to articulate what we're feeling, to find productive ways to live those feelings and manage them appropriately. And I think about that and like, speaking of paradox, like how interesting that invitation for emotional intelligence when we're talking about technology. It comes back to the human things we were mentioning earlier.
100%, because even if you look at that towel example and the patient care example, there's a common theme, right? The common theme is that people who are providing those goods and services are going to have to be much more conscious about their customers' ability to be so much deeper in terms of their need, and you as a provider to connect with those needs, which translate to empathy, which is the fundamental foundation of emotional intelligence, right? So you have to be far more empathetical in terms of how does my interaction and how does my thinking process, or how my seeking knowledge or designing a product connects or disconnects with my audience, right? So because I no longer have the barrier of creating them, but I have to create it for the audience that I'm supporting, who now has a lot more freedom in many ways to dig deeper, much deeper than they had any ability even a year ago.
Well, speaking of digging deeper, there are two things that I really love about this book. One of them is what you mentioned earlier, your son's story as a cancer survivor. You have been so generous to donate the proceeds of this book to cancer research. Thank you so much for doing that. What a wonderful gift to humanity. And then secondly, the things we haven't talked about today, because we've only zeroed in on about 3 pages from the book. There is so much more in the book on thinking about this through the lens of an individual, through an organization, and through the lens of government, both on the opportunities, the open framework, but also being cautious and protective of what we have and the care framework that you detail out in the book. There are so many frameworks, processes, checklists to follow for leaders and organizations, both thinking as individuals, but also thinking about their teams and even across government, that I think are wonderful starting points. So if this has piqued your interest, I hope you'll go get the book for the rest. Faisal Hoque is the author of Transcend, Unlocking Humanity in the Age of AI. Faisal, thank you so much for your work.
Thank you for having me.
If this conversation was helpful to you, 3 related episodes I'd recommend. One of them is episode 442, The Way to Be More Self-Aware. Tasha Urich was my guest on that episode, and we talked about self-awareness and where to start. And you heard in this conversation the invitation to be thinking more about that in the context of technology. It's not often the thing we think of when we're thinking about using technology, but getting better at the self-awareness piece can help us to partner with AI so much more effectively. I love the conversation with Tasha. A great starting point for doing that if you're thinking about that right now, or perhaps your interest is piqued a bit to lean in there more. Episode 442 for that. Also recommended episode 674, Principles for Using AI at Work. Ethan Mollick was my guest on that episode. He's out at Wharton, probably the leading voice in research on AI. Absolutely someone that we should all be paying attention to. I follow him on LinkedIn. You should too. So many wonderful things coming out of his work on thinking about how we use AI in the workplace. And the thing that I keep coming back to from that conversation with Ethan is we talked about the key principles for working with AI and how those principles are the same as they were when we recorded that episode well over a year ago. We looked at the timeless aspects of it, and I'm really struck by his work, how he's able to look at the elevation, the altitude around utilizing AI well. And if you have not spent a lot of time thinking about it, really getting into thinking about how you're utilizing it, that is a great place to start. And you're thinking about AI, episode 674. And then finally, I'd recommend the more recent episode with David De Kramer, episode 710, Becoming an AI Savvy Leader. You heard in that conversation also the message of the both and of AI and people, not the either or, not one or the other, but how we come together in partnership. It is a fabulous complement to this conversation. Again, episode 710 for that. All of those episodes, of course, you can find on the coachingforleaders.com website. And I'm inviting you today to set up your free membership at coachingforleaders.com, because when you do, you're going to get access to the entire library, searchable by topic. No surprise, one of those topics is AI. We have aired a number of episodes, including the ones I've mentioned just a moment ago on AI in the recent past. Of course, much more to come on this important topic for all of us, plus dozens of other categories. You can find what's most meaningful to you right now. But in addition to that, one of the other benefits you get with your free membership is my weekly leadership guide. Once a week, usually toward the end of the week, I send out an email with a summary of what we've talked about in each episode, some of the key quotes, resources, other links, and many of the articles, podcasts, resources, videos I have been finding throughout the week that I think will help support your leadership development. And not only do they go in the weekly leadership guide, but they also go right into my own personal library. That's also part of the free membership. Once you have your free membership set up, just go over to Dave's library. You can see the database archived of all of the articles, resources, podcasts, everything that I've shared in, I don't even know. I think it's been 6 or 7 years now, maybe 8, that I've been databasing everything I find. It's all available to you inside the free membership. If you haven't poked around in there before, go into the free membership, just click on Dave's library, and you will see thousands of resources there. And of course, all neatly organized so you can find what's most relevant to you right now. Coaching for Leaders is edited by Andrew Kroger. Production support is provided by Sierra Priest. Next week, we're going to have some fun. I've invited Kevin Evers to join me for a discussion about what leaders should learn from Taylor Swift. It's a fun conversation, and there's a lot to learn. Join me for that conversation with Kevin, and see you back next Monday.